Even though I've been in this role for almost 6 years, I still talk to people close to me who say, "What do you mean we test on animals?" Like, not really, right? That's like a thing of the past. So even just making people aware that this is still an issue and that it's a big issue and how widespread it is and how well funded it is, that educational piece is really big for us. And I think working within the scientific community and focusing on the policy and regulatory changes that we can try and influence really sets NAVS apart.
Welcome to the Better Life for Animals podcast, where we amplify the voices of animal advocates, sanctuaries, and changemakers working toward a kinder, more compassionate world. Through powerful stories and expert insights, we shine a light on the efforts to rescue, protect, and advocate for animals. Be sure to subscribe wherever you're watching or listening. Every follower helps us reach more people and support animal sanctuaries. Enjoy the conversation.
Today I'm talking with Meredith Blanchard, Senior Manager of Advocacy and Policy at the National Anti-Vivisection Society, where she works to advance humane, human-relevant science that doesn't rely on animal experimentation. With a background in animal welfare and public policy, Meredith helps shape legislative efforts, educate the public, and support scientists who are developing ethical alternatives to animal use in research and testing. She brings a deep belief that we can protect animals and improve science at the same time, and she spends her days turning in that vision into concrete change in labs, classrooms, and courtrooms across the country. Meredith, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, and thank you too for your interest in the issue of animals and research.
Oh, absolutely. Tell us, Meredith, what drew you to NAVS and to the idea of doing science without harming animals?
Absolutely. So I got my master's degree in animals and public policy with just the idea that I wanted to help animals, but I didn't really know what that could even look like. And it wasn't until I was in this master's program that I realized, like, I can talk to lawmakers about how I want animals to be treated. I can try and change laws to help animals, en masse instead of I'd been kind of in the rescue space before, working in an animal shelter, and again, just not really knowing what my options were to help animals. And this opportunity at NAVS came along, and what I found fascinating about it. Once I dug into it a little bit, because full disclosure, I didn't know too much about the use of animals in research before I started working with NAVS. But when I really started to dig into it, of course, the animal welfare issue and the ethical issue is what sucked me in. And then when I realized how broken our scientific environment is, and the scientific environment that relies very heavily on animal use, and how I really believe that we need to be getting rid of animals in laboratories in order to advance better human-based science. I was fully bought in once I realized that piece. I think, like a lot of people, I hadn't really considered or thought about how many animals are used in research in the United States. And that's on purpose, right? These experiments happen behind closed doors, heavily guarded. There's very little transparency about how many animals are used or what they go through. So I didn't really know. And the second I knew more, and the second I realized that science would be so better off without relying on animals, I was like bought in.
How do you explain your job at NAVS to someone who has never heard of anti-vivisection work?
Yes, that's a good question. The term anti-vivisection is a very old term. It specifically means live cutting. So it refers to kind of this old school, historic idea that we would just cut into live animals without any sedation, any pain medication, and just kind of dig around and like see what their organs were like and see what their bones were like and see what their setup was like. We don't quite do that as much as we do when that term was originally coined. It still does happen. And what I do is I advocate at both the federal and the state level to try and end the use of animals in any sort of research, testing, or education. So that covers, the doctoral students who are cutting into live animals to get a feel for how all the systems work together. It also includes drug testing on animals. It includes the EPA doing chemical testing for insecticides on animals. It also includes high school students and elementary and middle school students that are being asked to cut into worms, to cut into cow eyeballs, to dissect a toad. So it spans a kind of humanity from, elementary school through postdoctoral research. And we are trying to change the system to see animals as individuals and not as lab tools that we just use to attempt to learn from. And so that's my role at NAVS specifically, is changing policy, educating folks, and trying to envision a world and make that world a reality of not harming animals for the purpose of scientific knowledge.
Hmm. NAVS has been around since 1929. That's a long time.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
almost 100 years. What makes its approach to ending animal testing stand out today?
Yeah, so at NAVS, we really work, and it is very exciting. In a few years, we're going to be celebrating our 100 years. It was one of the first animal advocacy organizations in the United States. And our approach is really, while we're an anti-vivisection society, which makes us an abolitionist organization, right? We want to see complete end to the use of animals in research. We also understand that scientists, researchers will not move forward until they're given a alternative. So we work with scientists. We actually work with our partner organization, the International Foundation for Ethical Research, to fund early career scientists that have come to their careers and said, I want to study this disease, or I want to find a cure for XYZ, but I don't want to use animals. I'm going to develop my own human-based method of studying this or of testing, this drug. So we help find and fund individuals that are working to advance the science that will replace animals one day. So I think that's one piece that's different from us. We try to really focus on the policy and the regulation as opposed to attacking institutions, attacking scientists, that sort of thing. We're very heavy on education of the issue. Even though I've been in this role for almost 6 years, I still talk to people close to me who say, "What do you mean we test on animals?" Like, not really, right? That's like a thing of the past. So even just making people aware that this is still an issue and that it's a big issue and how widespread it is and how well funded it is, that educational piece is really big for us. And I think working within the scientific community and focusing on the policy and regulatory changes that we can try and influence really sets NAVS apart. And as part actually of our 100-year celebration, we have kicked off a campaign called Crossroads 2029 that focuses on targeting the federal agencies that are really continuing the use of animals, even though it's not necessary. So it is a very exciting time right now. I don't know how aware you are of kind of the federal announcements that have been made in the last year, both from the National Institutes of Health and from the Food and Drug Administration, that have said it's kind of fun. They're using our talking points because they have realized that animal models are not justified anymore. And they're saying, we need to move on. We need to reduce our reliance on animals. We need to replace animals wherever possible. We need to move on from this structure that we have relied on for so long. And they've made these promises to reduce and replace animals. And as part of our Crossroads 2029 campaign, we're working to hold these agencies to account and hold them to the pledges that they've made so that when a new administration comes in, when new leadership comes into these agencies, they don't backtrack and go back to, what's comfortable and what's known, which is animal models.
It does seem to be the one bright spot in,
Yeah, it is.
caring
It
for
is.
this, for animal cruelty. It seems
Yep,
like as though public sentiment is moving away from this. I don't,
big time.
I, I, I marvel at it. I did a post about, what's going on at Ridgeland. I
Yep.
cannot tell you how many responses I've been getting, and I never get
Oh
those
yeah.
kind of responses. It's like, this is great. I'm
Yeah.
so glad you care about beagles.
Yes,
Let's talk
absolutely.
about all the other animals that are
Right.
feeling the same way. And I'm wondering, what do you've been there 6 years. Have you seen a change? Is it AI that's kicking in?
Hmm. Hmm.
I know that there's, I've heard the statistics that most of these animal testing methods are not even all that effective. So
Yes,
I'm wondering
absolutely.
what do you see as turning the tide?
So what we see, and I alluded to it a minute ago, is this fantastic. Animal activists for years have been saying animal models don't work. We need to move on. Animal models don't work. They're failing us because of XYZ, which I'm happy to go over all of the issues with animal models. Um, and for the longest time, the administration, the agencies that are funding and creating the need for animals have fought back against those talking points and said, no, animal models have gotten us so far, and it's because of animal models that we can, sometimes maybe cure a specific kind of cancer. um, but now the federal agencies are agreeing. They're saying, you're right. There's been a lot of studies that say that for numerous reasons, animal models are not the gold standard that we've been calling them all of these years. And it's time to move on. And so that's a big piece of it. And it's really exciting. In line with that, we're seeing the development of human-based methods. So you mentioned AI. AI is, and I should say out front, I am not a computer person. I am not a scientist myself. But AI is based off of human biology. It's not based off of dog biology or mouse biology or guinea pig biology. The data in there is human based. And so whatever those very, very smart coding folks are doing that are building AI, they're building it based off of human biology. So we're bound to get better results than basing things off of, non-human animal biology. Similarly, there's things called organ on a chip. I don't know if you've heard of this very cool technology, where scientists have created microfluidic systems that mimic different organs in our body, like lung on a chip, liver on a chip, which is really important for drug toxicity testing. These little chips that use human cells, and in fact, they can use individual cells. So if I need to try this specific drug, my liver might react to the drug different than your liver might. So let's test my liver cells with this drug in a liver on a chip before I take this medication to make sure it's safe for me. Even though, it might act differently for you, that sort of thing. So we're looking at kind of specialized, individualized medicine, which is really cool. Um, there's also organoids. Again, I don't know the science behind them, but they kind of build these 3D organ models to test different things. We talked about AI, or computing, algorithms running drugs through billions of test points to see if that drug would harm a human instead of running it through animal models, that sort of thing. So it's a super exciting time because we have these alternatives coming up faster than we're even able to implement and use them, which is a part of what we're fighting for right now. And we're seeing kind of the powers that be say, all right, we concede, you guys are right. Animal models are not working. Let's move on to something else, which is really exciting.
Do you know the statistics on how effective or not effective animal testing on animals is? Because I know we've been
Sure.
talking about that. I really want our audience to hear those staggering numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the big issues with animal models is the very, very low translatability rate. And what I mean by that is that what we see in a mouse, guinea pig, dog, even non-human primate, and how they react to a drug or a chemical does not translate to how humans will react to that drug or chemical at a rate of 95%. So 95% of drugs that pass through animal trials fail in human trials, either because that drug proved toxic and harmful to humans, or because the drug did not do what scientists thought it would do. It doesn't, cure or help whatever they were targeting. So low translatability is a very big issue. Similarly, low reproducibility. So in science, we can't take something as fact if one person does it. They need to be able to reproduce those results over and over again in order to say this is fact. So animal models, well, not of like papers that have been published using animal models, only only 11% are reproducible. So 89% fail to be reproduced. So kind of a simple way to say that is, if I'm trying to say that 2 + 2 is 4, but when I'm counting my beans, I get 2 + 2 = 7, and 2 + 2 = 5, and 2 + 2 = 6. Then can I really say that 2 + 2 = 4? It only happened once out of 4 times, so that sort of thing. That's what reproducibility is. Another issue, and this is really fascinating to me and something that gets me really charged up, is false positives with animal models, which is this idea that just as 95% of drugs fail because they passed animal trials and then failed in humans, there's the issue of what about compounds, what about chemicals, what about drugs that were fatal or harmful in animals, but could have been helpful to humans. So a false positive is when an animal test incorrectly signals something harmful, and so we don't move forward with it. Now, something very interesting, there are 2 drugs that you may have heard of, penicillin and aspirin. If these 2 drugs had been developed and approved during the time when drug testing was mandated, or animal testing was mandated for drugs, those drugs would not exist today because penicillin is toxic in certain animal species, such as guinea pigs, a very common animal that we test drugs on. And aspirin causes birth defects and other toxicities in several animal species, but obviously is very helpful for human health. So there's no telling what compounds, what therapies we have missed out on because they proved harmful in animal models and never moved forward, which is just something that blows me away. And then, of course, not the last, but another big issue is it ethical to use animals in research? Animal research really depends on on a paradox. Scientists say that animal models resemble humans enough to be useful, but they differ from humans enough to make their use acceptable in research. And this paradox has not been pushed on hard enough, because the ultimate question is, do humans actually have a right to use these animals in research? I would say, and I think a lot of your audience would agree, that we do not. And that's a paradox that researchers have to square in their head, and that when you actually sit and think about why we use animals and why we think their use is acceptable, it doesn't hold up to the reality of what these animals are experiencing.
You're listening to Better Life for Animals podcast. Our mission is to amplify the voices of animal advocates, sanctuaries, and changemakers working toward a kinder, more compassionate world. But we can't do it alone. We need your help. First of all, go ahead and subscribe to this channel wherever you're watching or listening. And then get involved by visiting betterlifeforanimals.com. That's betterlifeforanimals.com. Be sure to check out our blog, learn more about incredible sanctuaries, and explore our book section, where 100% of net proceeds from book sales are donated to sanctuaries. Every action you take helps to make a difference. And remember, subscribe to this channel. And now back to the show.
If you're just joining us, we are speaking with Meredith Blanchard of NAVS. So Meredith, you were talking about Crossroads 2029, which is what, 3 years away?
Yeah.
If
Yep.
I'm getting my math right. Do you find, the money, these grants are put together as they were from history, I guess, and do you find that the scientific community are open and willing and wanting to move to more humane methods, or do you find that they don't care? They're just going where the money is? I appreciate that we're getting there, but how soon can we get there? If you got some alternative and you don't have to use animals now, do you find that's where the interest is?
So you're right. It is not moving as quickly as we would like to see the transition happen, especially given that so many alternatives, so many human-based superior methods are available. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I think one of the biggest one is institutional inertia. So most of this research, a lot of this breakthrough science is happening in institutions that have spent decades building up an animal-based infrastructure. This covers their facilities, it's their staffing, they need animal care staff, they need veterinarians, they need people trained in animal behavior and animal welfare, they have facilities and HVAC systems set up to house animals, in their laboratory rooms. The funding streams, as you mentioned, are all set up to support this institution of animal use. And we've talked to individuals and talked to young scientists who say, I didn't want to use animals, but in my postdoctoral research, I was matched up with a mentor who had done research on monkeys for their entire career. They said that was the only way to study the disease that I want to study. And that was at my disposal, and that's what I had to use if I wanted to do this research. So the institutional inertia is very difficult to get by. But as you mentioned, just like everything else in our capitalist society, you follow the money. And NIH recently, within the last year, actually almost about a year ago, made some pretty influential decisions to kind of change their funding structure to require that people seeking funding from the NIH, aren't just relying on animal models. There has to be a component of these non-animal methods, which is pretty groundbreaking. It hasn't been long enough for us to really see the effect of that play out. We don't have access, for example, to 2025 animal use numbers yet. They haven't been released. So we're not sure what effect that's playing. A lot of grants are multi-year grants. So that process of kind of seeing the result of that decision is a little slow, but it's very, very promising, and it should get institutions, especially institutions that are funded by NIH, to really start adopting these other models quicker than they had before. So that's another part where NAVS plays in, is this regulatory and policy environment. So, because as usual, policy and regulations are lagging behind scientific innovation. So we're really trying to bring policy up to speed, both at the government level, but also at the institutional level. I'm in the middle of drafting comments for NIH's 5-year plan, urging them to continue down this road of prioritizing non-animal methods. And if we can continue down this road far enough, the hope is that it won't make sense to go backwards. But you're right, it's a slower process than many of us would like to see. But we're seeing some really promising steps at high up levels, which is great.
If you are an avid podcast listener and are always looking for another podcast to add to your playlist, Then here is a suggestion. Lantern Voices is a podcast by Lantern Publishing and Media. Every month, a different author or authors published by Lantern is interviewed. They talk about animal rights, veganism, social justice, and other topics that you may be interested in. For those of you who don't know, I have 3 books published by Lantern Publishing, a trilogy of children's books, Gabriel, Cluck, and Pickle. I was one of their first guests invited by Lantern Voices, and if you'd like to hear me in conversation with another Lantern author, Anouk Frolic, the episode is number 3 of season 1. We talked about children's books, how to bring up veganism with children, and more. Lantern's Voices is available in all main podcast streaming platforms. Anytime there's a summit and there's a speaker or panel that's offering information about what you do, I find it to be the hardest because they sometimes describe extremely graphic things.
Yes.
And even in doing this work on this podcast, we run into some very tragic situations, which I won't go into, but sometimes it makes me think, because I'm still upset about it a week later, still thinking about this one thing.
Yeah.
And I just always wonder what's the right mix of, just letting the government work its way.
Of course.
Or we get the public involved like they're doing. Just the one example I have is this Ridgeland situation right now. People are so upset. Well, wouldn't they be even more upset if they knew this, that, and the other thing?
Absolutely.
I wonder, how does NAVS navigate that? Do you try to pull in more political might through public sentiment, or do you leave it alone?
Yeah, we do walk a line, kind of like I alluded to earlier, of like, we're not trying to demonize the folks using animals in research, because again, that is how this whole juggernaut is set up, right? They don't really, and haven't for decades, had other options. That's starting to change, but we can't. I don't think that it's right to fault the people who are trying in earnest to help humans and to solve the health crises that we are running into every day as humans, and they're trying to help that, and that's a good thing. The Ridgeland example is the perfect example of how nuanced this issue is. I won't get into all of the legal stuff that's going on with Ridgeland, honestly, because I'm not super well versed in it. Do I understand why animal advocates have rushed in there? Absolutely. The inspection reports out of Ridgeland, the violations that they've incurred over and over and over again without any sort of penalty, or at least nothing meaningful, is super frustrating. Absolutely. So I feel for those individuals that are like, we have got to, I have a dog at my feet right now. Like, these animals don't deserve this. And I absolutely understand that viewpoint. I also see a flip side of it, where we've seen that this Ridgeland situation has harmed, or has potential to harm, relationships between rescues that take animals from laboratories and the laboratories themselves. Those are very, very fragile relationships. I'm in contact with some of those rescues that are saying this could really hurt our ability to continue to take animals from laboratories, because the laboratories aren't going to trust us. So those animals could be, euthanized as opposed to released to these rescues. So it really is a nuanced issue. I don't think that breaking the law and trespassing is really the way to go about it. I think it can create backlash to the movement in general. But I understand those rescuers' feelings. I feel it myself, day in and day out, reading about what these institutions and what these laboratories get away with. And so it's a really tough issue. Yeah. But NAVS ourselves, we try to walk that line of working with the scientists, working with the researchers to transition away from animals, instead of attacking them.
A lot of what we like to focus on, aside from sanctuaries here at Better Life for Animals, is also what's going on with young people, because we really do
Mhm.
believe that they're the ones that are going to push this movement forward.
Absolutely.
So I'm really happy to hear that you work with classrooms, and I'm wondering what kind of exciting examples you might be able to offer to our audience about what's happening in the classrooms today.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think the first time I dissected a cow's eye was in like second grade.
Mm.
Like, what is a second grader learning from dissecting a cow's eye except, ew, this is gooey. I don't want anything to do with this. Um, but it is really exciting to be working with the younger generation because of social media, because of their access to the world that, generations prior to them never had. They are seeing things in a different light. They're questioning things that perhaps once were just seen as standard, like, all the use of animals. Really exciting. We have a program called BioLeap that specifically focuses on dissection in the classroom and getting animals out of classrooms, and replacing those dissection specimens with humane models of dissection, whether that be like a what is it when you put on the goggles and you're doing, moving your hands around and dissecting an animal through the goggles, or paper models, or plastic models, clay models. There's all sorts of really cool stuff out there now, and these um, dissection alternatives are typically reusable, which is great for a classroom trying to save money. And they have been shown to teach dissection and teach anatomy at really the same level as cutting into an animal, and sometimes even better because you don't have people turned off by the smell and by the feel and by what they're actually, ethics or religious objections, all these sorts of things. So students are really excited to use these dissection alternatives. And there's actually, I can't quite speak to specifics. It's not a program that I am actively involved with daily, but there are a number of schools right now in the Chicago school district, that have received grants from NAVS to purchase dissection alternatives, and we're working on getting those in classrooms right now. So it's really exciting. We have this grant program to provide educators with materials, to either completely get rid of dissection in their classrooms or to at the very least provide a option for students that don't want to participate in dissection themselves. So we're seeing that more and more. I think having those dissection alternatives in the classroom, you're also able to have a conversation about the the moral justification of using dissection animals, as opposed to these other options that are available. So it opens up a moral and ethical discussion as well that is, good to have when students are younger. So it's a really exciting program. It's one that's grown year over year, and we see more and more teachers and more students interested in it, which is great.
I love that. Well, NAV says that community voices are essential. So, what have you learned about helping supporters actually influence decision makers? What's your recommendation?
Yeah. That's a really good question. We do have, we follow and track legislation at the federal and state level, and ask our supporters, to email their lawmakers, to email their members of Congress in support of various legislation and that sort of thing. That's all influential. I think people want more. They want more options. And a lot we've heard from lawmakers that say, these form emails aren't the most influential. At best, we count like, here's 10 form emails in favor of this law, and here's 20 against this law, and they tally it up like that. Really, the most influential thing that people can do is call their legislators to change laws. Meet with them in person is even better. Whether it be meeting with a staff person at a local office, that's just fine. But also, and I stress this a lot, talking to other people about it, and just having a couple basic talking points, to bring to the table when you're talking with your friends, when you're talking with with your child or with your child's teacher about dissection, or maybe you're talking with your child who is interested in pursuing a science degree. Talk to them about what the options are. If we can get more conversations going, like you said, once people become aware of the issue, that it's pretty fascinating. One, that we use animals at all because it's pretty Stone Age, and two, that there are such better options available that are being slow to adopt it, but the excitement around them is growing. So it's exciting for those young people that are just coming into it.
Well, the good news is we live in a time when there is an alternative.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So it's nice to be able to offer a positive choice.
Yes, yes.
And then it's easier to answer the question, should we be doing this at all?
Right.
Right?
What we need to do
the
now
answer is no.
Yeah, right, exactly. What we need to do now is really mandate the use of alternatives when they're available, instead of like what the FDA and NIH are doing now is we suggest, or you can use these. These other non-animal methods are allowable. We are working on trying to get like a mandate in place. You must use alternatives when they're available. Yeah, that'd be a big step.
Because as long as they have the choice and the systems are already in place, like you said, the facilities, all of that infrastructure is already in place, it's going to, for someone, just say it's easier to just stick with what I've got, as opposed to, the choice isn't readily available. Yeah.
Yeah. We like to think of science as this, futuristic, cutting edge, and it should be. That's what we need. That's what we deserve. But unfortunately, the reality is that it is very comfortable with what's known, and that's what continues oftentimes. So we need that external pressure to say, no, we need to look at this system again and retool it, because it is not producing the outcomes that we need right now.
Right. And it's inhumane, it's cruel.
Yes.
And let's stop it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, Meredith, this has been a fabulous conversation. If there's anything else that I forgot to ask, please throw that in right now. Otherwise, tell us how we can find you and how we can support you.
Absolutely. So again, I'm with the National Anti-Vivisection Society. We've been working for almost 100 years to advance science without harming animals. And you can check out our work at NAVS.org. I would recommend checking out our Crossroads 2029 campaign, which is on the website. And we also have an action center there where people can go and see if there's any actions that can be taken at their state level or at the federal level. Anyone in the US can take action at the federal level. And I really just urge people to kind of, be a little more educated about this issue, even if it's, unfortunately, as I'm sure you know, it's not always the animal welfare or ethical argument that gets people to change. But honestly, really, the scientific environment, the way we've been doing it, is broken, and it is not giving us the therapies and the drugs and the outcomes that we need. And we need to put the pressure on scientists to change their ways, make them a little uncomfortable, use new things. And I truly, truly believe we'll start to see faster, cheaper health outcomes for humans. So educate yourself a bit on the topic, and you can always reach me. And if with any questions, my email is mblanchard@navs.org. And we'd love to bring more people into the movement.
Thank you, Meredith. Thank you for everything that you do for animals.
Thank you. Thank you so much for helping me elevate the conversation.
We'll do it again.
Wonderful.
This has been Better Life for Animals, and we've been speaking with Meredith Blanchard of NAVS. And if you would like to help her, please reach out. And if you enjoyed this conversation, please like and subscribe so that we can create a better life for animals.
Thank you for joining us on the Better Life for Animals podcast. Together, we can create a world where all beings are treated with dignity, respect, and care. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you're listening. It helps us reach more people and spread awareness about the incredible work happening in animal sanctuaries. You can also share this episode with friends and fellow advocates to keep the conversation going. Until next time, keep speaking up, taking action, and making a difference for the animals.